For 73 years, humanity quietly held the galaxy together with invisible threads of compassion until the day they finally stopped trying. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council fell silent. Ambassador Chen Wei's holographic image flickered to life before the assembled delegates. Representatives from 100 world-scaled reptilians, crystalline ethereals, gaseous nebulans, and dozens of other species turned their attention to the small human figure standing at the center of the chamber. Chen's expression was calm, almost serene, as she began what would be humanity's final address to the council. Her voice carried no anger, no bitterness, only a quiet resignation that somehow made her words more devastating than any heated accusation could have been. Honored delegates, she began, her hands clasped behind her back in the way humans did when delivering difficult news. I stand before you today not to argue, not to plead, and not to threaten. I come to inform you that the Terran Federation has made its decision. We are withdrawing from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. A ripple of shock ran through the assembly. The Vorthic delegate, his scaled head cresting with agitation, leaned forward in his hover seat. Surely the humans jest. You cannot simply leave the council. There are procedures, protocols. Chen's slight smile was sadder than any frown. We have followed your procedures for 73 years. Counselor Vrex, we have submitted to your protocols, abided by your regulations, and accepted your decisions even when those decisions systematically excluded us from meaningful participation in galactic affairs. High Counselor Zephes, an ancient ethereal whose crystalline form pulsed with nervous energy, spoke in harmonics that the translation matrix rendered as concern. Ambassador Chen, surely we can discuss this. If humanity has grievances. Chen's laugh was soft, musical even, but it carried an echo of something broken. High Counselor, we have presented 4,847 formal grievances over the past 7 decades. Each one was reviewed, filed, and ultimately dismissed. We propose 2,156 beneficial technologies for galactic use, technologies that could have eliminated hunger, disease, and energy scarcity across 1,000 worlds. Each proposal was deemed too radical or incompatible with established galactic norms. The ambassador paused, letting the numbers sink in. The delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Appendages, or energy fields as appropriate to their species. We offered to share our music, our art, our literature, expressions of the human soul that we believed might enrich the greater galactic community. We were told that human creative works were too emotional and disruptive to proper mental harmony. We offered our diplomatic services to mediate conflicts, only to be informed that humans were too unpredictable to be trusted with such responsibilities. Chen's image flickered slightly as the transmission stabilized. When she continued, her voice held the weight of accumulated disappointment. For 73 years, we have been members of this council in name only. We have paid our dues, attended our meetings, and followed your laws, but when we speak, you do not hear us. When we offer gifts, you reject them. When we seek inclusion, you find excuses for exclusion. We have been tolerated, never welcomed, endured, never embraced. The silence that followed Chen's words was absolute. In the vast chamber, beings who had debated and argued for millennia found themselves speechless. The ambassador's hologram stood perfectly still, waiting with the infinite patience that humans had learned to cultivate during their long years of disappointment. Finally, Counselor Kethfer of the hegemony spoke, his serpentine form coiling with agitation. This is preposterous. Humanity cannot simply abandon their responsibilities to the galactic community. There are treaties, trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, all of which, Chen interrupted gently, will be honored until their natural expiration dates. We are not abandoning our responsibilities, Counselor. We are simply stepping back. Humanity will complete all current obligations, fulfill all existing contracts, and pay all outstanding debts. We will not leave chaos in our wake that would be contrary to our nature. The nebular representative, whisper of distant stars, spoke in the subsonic frequencies that made the chamber's atmosphere tremble. But why now? What has precipitated this sudden decision? Chen's expression grew thoughtful. It was not sudden. Whisper of distant stars. This decision has been building for decades. But if you require a specific catalyst, double quote, she paused, accessing files through her neural interface. 3 months ago, the colony world of New Harmony suffered a massive earthquake. 50,000 beings of 17 different species were trapped in collapsed mining tunnels. Human rescue teams arrived. Within 6 hours, we had developed new mining technology that could extract survivors without further destabilizing the tunnels. The ambassador's voice grew softer, more distant. The local sector governor, a Vorthic administrator, refused to allow our rescue teams to operate. He stated that human technology was unproven and potentially hazardous. He insisted we wait for proper council-approved rescue equipment to arrive. That equipment reached New Harmony 4 days later. Chen's eyes met the optical sensors of several delegates. 47,000 beings died in those tunnels while our rescue ships sat in orbit, forbidden to help. Among the dead were 3,200 human colonists who had chosen to make New Harmony their home, alongside their alien neighbors. The chamber's atmosphere seemed to grow heavier. Several delegates found themselves unable to meet the human ambassador's gaze. That night, Chen continued, I received a message from a dying human named Sarah Martinez. She was trapped 200 meters below ground with her hegemony friend, Seth, and their 2 hybrid children. Sarah's last words to me were, tell them we tried to belong. Tell them we really tried. The ambassador's composure finally cracked, just slightly. A single tear traced down her cheek. That was when humanity realized that 73 years of trying was enough. We cannot change your minds. So, we will no longer exhaust ourselves in the attempt. High Counselor Zephys pulsed with what the translation matrix interpreted as distress. Ambassador Chen, surely you understand that the Council must act cautiously. The introduction of new technologies and ideas requires careful study. Extensive testing, careful study, Chen repeated, her voice carrying a note of profound weariness. Yes, we are familiar with your methods of careful study. When we offered quantum healing technology that could regenerate lost limbs and cure genetic diseases, the Council spent 19 years in careful study. When we presented clean fusion reactors that could power entire systems without environmental impact, careful study lasted 26 years. When we shared our breakthrough in faster-than-light communication that could connect every world in the galaxy instantaneously, the study has been ongoing for 31 years. The ambassador activated a holographic display showing a complex timeline in the 73 years of our membership. Exactly 0 human innovations have been approved for general galactic use. 0. Our medical advances that could have saved billions of lives sit locked in council archives. Our agricultural techniques that could have ended hunger on resource-poor worlds remain classified as pending review. Our entertainment media that could have brought joy and wonder to countless beings is deemed unsuitable for general consumption. Councillor Vrex's scales rattled with indignation. The Council has legitimate concerns about human unpredictability. Your species is known for emotional volatility, for making decisions based on feelings rather than logic, and yet, Chen interrupted, her voice growing stronger, in 73 years of membership, humanity has never broken a treaty, defaulted on a debt, or initiated an aggressive action against any council member. Our emotional volatility has manifested as volunteer medical missions to plague-stricken worlds, disaster relief efforts that ask for nothing in return, and cultural exchange programs that we funded entirely from our own resources. She gestured, and the holographic display shifted to show a star map dotted with glowing points. These lights represent human charitable missions over the past 7 decades, food distribution to the Outer Rim during the Grain Blight, medical supplies to the crystalline worlds during the Resonance Plague, engineering expertise to rebuild the hegemony orbital stations after the solar storm crisis, clean water systems for the desert colonies of the periphery. The map blazed with thousands of points of light, a constellation of human compassion stretching across the galaxy. We asked for nothing in return. Chen said quietly, we expected nothing in return. But we had hoped foolishly, perhaps that our actions might speak louder than your preconceptions about our nature. Whisper of distant stars pulsed with deep subsonic frequencies that registered as confusion on the translation matrix. We do not understand, Ambassador Chen. If humanity seeks recognition, surely continued participation in council affairs is the path to eventual acceptance. Chen's smile was infinitely sad. Whisper of distant stars. There is an old human saying. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over while expecting different results. We have participated faithfully for 73 years. We have submitted to every review, answered every inquiry, and addressed every concern. Yet our standing in this council remains exactly what it was on the day we joined, that of barely tolerated newcomers whose contributions are suspect and whose motivations are questioned. The ambassador turned slowly, addressing different sections of the chamber. We are departing not in anger, but in acceptance. We accept that the galaxy you have built functions according to principles that are fundamentally incompatible with human nature. We accept that our desire to help, to share, to contribute is seen as disruptive rather than beneficial. We accept that our emotional investment in the welfare of others is viewed as instability rather than strength. High Counselor Zephy's crystalline form shifted through a spectrum of colors indicating deep thought. But surely humanity understands that galactic civilization requires stability, predictability, order. Indeed, Chen agreed. And you have achieved remarkable stability. In the 3,000 years since the formation of this council, member civilizations have maintained the status quo with admirable consistency. Hunger rates have remained stable. Disease patterns show predictable fluctuations. Energy shortages follow established cycles. Territorial disputes are resolved according to time-tested protocols. You have built a galaxy of magnificent, unchanging stability. Her voice grew softer, more contemplative. But humans... we are creatures of change. We see suffering and we cannot help but try to end it. We encounter problems and we cannot help but seek solutions. We find beauty and we cannot help but share it. We meet strangers and we cannot help but try to understand them. This is our nature, and we have learned that it is incompatible with your vision of galactic order. The chamber fell silent again. The truth of her words hung in the air like a physical presence, undeniable and uncomfortable. So, we leave, Chen continued, not to punish you, not to prove a point, but simply because we have finally accepted that we do not belong here. We will return to our own worlds, tend to our own affairs, and stop disturbing your carefully maintained equilibrium. Counselor Kethfer uncoiled partially from his resting position. This is all quite philosophical, Ambassador, but what of practical concerns? Humanity controls 17 critical hyperspace routes. Your industrial capacity accounts for 12% of galactic output. Your research institutions collaborate with universities across known space. You cannot simply withdraw from these relationships without causing massive disruption. Shen nodded thoughtfully. You raise valid concerns, Counselor. We have given this considerable thought. She gestured, and a new holographic display materialized, detailed charts and projections showing trade routes, production schedules, and resource flows. All hyperspace routes currently managed by human traffic control will be transferred to Council authority over the next 18 months. We will provide complete technical documentation and training for Council personnel. Our industrial contracts will be honored through completion, with no new agreements accepted. Our research partnerships will continue until current projects reach natural conclusion points. The ambassador's tone remained professionally calm as she outlined humanity's withdrawal. We estimate the transition period will require approximately 2 years for full completion. During this time, human advisory personnel will remain available. To ensure smooth handovers, we will not abandon ongoing commitments abruptly that would cause exactly the kind of disruption we seek to avoid. High Counselor Zephyrs pulsed with what seemed like panic. But the economic implications alone, humanity's consumer markets, your innovation sectors, the cultural exchange programs, will be replaced by others. Given time, Chen finished gently. The galaxy managed quite well for millennia before humanity joined the Council. It will adapt to our absence, as it adapted to our presence. Markets will find new equilibriums. Other species will develop innovations to fill any gaps we leave behind. Culture will continue to evolve, perhaps along more traditionally acceptable lines. She paused, then added with quiet dignity, "We offer one final gift, though we suspect it will be declined like so many others. In our databases, we have compiled 73 years of detailed observations about galactic civilization social patterns, economic trends, technological developments, cultural evolution. We see things differently than you do, and our perspective might offer insights that could benefit future generations." Chen's image flickered slightly as she transmitted the data offer. This compilation includes our analyses of systemic inefficiencies that contribute to ongoing problems like resource distribution inequities, communication barriers between species, and the slow pace of beneficial change. We also include our proposed solutions not because we expect them to be implemented, but because they might inspire others to develop better alternatives. The silence that followed was deafening. Every delegate in the chamber understood the magnitude of what was being offered and what was being lost. Whisper of distant stars generated a complex harmonic that the translation matrix struggled to interpret, something between regret and desperate hope. Ambassador Chen, surely there must be some accommodation we can reach. Some compromise that would allow humanity to remain within the galactic community while addressing your concerns. For the first time during the entire address, Chen's composure wavered. Her professional mask slipped, revealing the deep exhaustion beneath. Whisper of distant stars, for 73 years, humanity has been the one making compromises. We compromised our desire to share life-saving medical technology because the Council deemed it too disruptive to established medical paradigms. We compromised our wish to establish rapid response disaster relief protocols because they were incompatible with proper bureaucratic oversight. We compromised our hope of cultural integration because human art and music were considered emotionally destabilizing. The ambassador's voice grew stronger, more resolute. We compromised our children's future by accepting restrictions on human educational methods in mixed-species schools. We compromised our scientific advancement by agreeing to delays and limitations on research that could have benefited everyone. We compromised our fundamental nature by learning to suppress our instincts to help, to heal, to improve the conditions we encountered. Chen looked directly at each section of the chamber in turn. The question is not whether we can reach an accommodation. The question is whether you are willing to make compromises of your own. Are you prepared to accept that human solutions might sometimes be better than traditional methods? Are you ready to embrace change, even when it disrupts comfortable routines? Can you welcome emotional investment in others' welfare as a strength rather than a weakness? The silence stretched on. Delegates shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances that spoke volumes about their internal conflicts. "I thought not," Chen said sadly. "And that is why we must leave. Not because we cannot compromise, we have proven our willingness to do so repeatedly, but because the compromises required to remain would require us to stop being human. And that is the one thing we cannot do." High Counselor Zephyrs pulsed through a rapid spectrum of colors indicating extreme agitation. But the precedent. This sets if one member species can simply withdraw whenever they feel underappreciated. No other species has tried for 73 years to integrate while being systematically excluded. Chen replied firmly. No other species has offered as much while asking for so little in return. No other species has maintained such patience. In the face of such consistent rejection, humanity's situation is unique. High Counselor, our withdrawal sets no precedent because no other species has followed our path of attempted integration. She paused, then added with quiet dignity, besides, the precedent was set long ago not by us, but by you. You established that membership in this council requires conformity to existing norms, acceptance of traditional ways, and submission to the judgment of established powers. We simply accepted your terms and found them incompatible with our continued participation. Counselor Vrex's scales had settled into patterns indicating deep thought rather than agitation. Ambassador, you speak of humanity's contributions as if they were entirely altruistic. But surely your species has benefited from council membership as well. Chen nodded immediately. Absolutely, Counselor Vrex. We have learned much from our association with galactic civilization. Council membership has exposed us to hundreds of different perspectives, philosophies, and approaches to existence. We have gained access to technologies and knowledge that accelerated our development by centuries. We have formed friendships with individuals from dozens of species, creating bonds that will outlast our political separation. Her expression grew more contemplative. But the benefits we received were never the exclusive privileges that the Council seems to believe they were. Knowledge shared freely loses no value in the sharing. Friendships formed through mutual respect and common interests do not require political frameworks to sustain them. The technologies we learned were often improvements on concepts we already possessed or were developing independently. Chen activated another holographic display, this one showing a comparison chart. This analysis shows the value exchange between humanity and the Council over our 73-year membership. The left column represents what we received access to established technologies, participation in existing trade networks, inclusion in diplomatic frameworks. The right column represents what we offered: new technologies, humanitarian aid, cultural contributions, innovative solutions to persistent problems. The numbers were stark, even accounting for subjective valuations and conversion difficulties between different types of contributions. Humanity had given far more than it had received. We do not present this analysis to claim unfair treatment. Chen continued. We entered the Council knowing we were newcomers seeking inclusion in an established order. We expected to prove ourselves over time. What we did not expect was that the burden of proof would never end, that the goalposts would constantly shift, and that our contributions would be simultaneously accepted and dismissed. Whisper of distant stars pulsed with subsonic frequencies, indicating confusion. If humanity felt this imbalance was unjust, why did you not raise formal complaints through proper channels? Chen's laugh was soft but bitter. We did, repeatedly. Complaint 847 addressed the systematic rejection of human medical innovations, despite their proven effectiveness. Complaint 1203 questioned why human disaster relief efforts were simultaneously praised as heroic and criticized as destabilizing. Complaint 2156 asked why human cultural contributions were deemed too emotional for general consumption, while similar works from other species were celebrated as profound artistic achievements. The ambassador's voice grew tired. Each complaint was reviewed by committees composed entirely of non-human species. Each review concluded that Council policies were appropriate and that humanity's concerns were based on misunderstandings of proper galactic procedures. We were told that our perspective was limited by our relative youth as a spacefaring species and our tendency toward emotional reasoning. She paused, then added with quiet intensity, after 4,700 complaints yielding identical results, we realized that the system was not designed to address our concerns. It was designed to validate existing decisions and maintain established hierarchies. So, we stopped complaining and started planning our departure. High Counselor Zephy's crystalline form had stabilized into patterns indicating deep concern. Ambassador Chen, we are beginning to understand humanity's frustration. But consider the broader implications of your withdrawal. If every species that felt underappreciated were to leave the Council, galactic civilization would fragment into isolated enclaves. Surely that outcome serves no one's interests. Chen's response was immediate and thoughtful. High Counselor, you assume that our withdrawal will inspire others to follow suit. But consider the fundamental difference in our situations. Most species that join the Council do so seeking the benefits of membership protection, trade opportunities, access to advanced technologies, inclusion in the galactic community. They receive these benefits and consider the exchange fair. She gestured toward the holographic displays still floating around her. Humanity never sought those benefits as primary goals. We joined the Council because we believed we could contribute to something greater than ourselves. We thought we could help build a better galaxy, one with less suffering, more prosperity, greater understanding between species. We were not seeking to take from galactic civilization, we were hoping to give to it. The ambassador's voice grew more philosophical. When a species withdraws because they are not receiving enough benefits, that represents selfishness that might indeed inspire imitators. When we withdraw because we are not being allowed to contribute meaningfully, that represents a completely different dynamic. We are not seeking to gain more from the Council. We are accepting that the Council does not want what we have to offer. Counselor Kepfer's serpentine form coiled thoughtfully. But surely isolation serves no one's interests. If humanity withdraws from galactic civilization, how can you achieve the goals that motivated your original desire to contribute? Chen's smile was sad but serene. We cannot achieve those goals within the framework of galactic civilization as it currently exists, but we can pursue them within our own sphere of influence. Human colonies will continue to develop new technologies, create new art, explore new ideas. Human ships will still respond to disaster calls from any world that will accept our help. Human researchers will still seek cures for diseases and solutions to persistent problems. She paused, looking around the chamber with something approaching fondness. The difference will be that we will no longer spend decades seeking permission to implement beneficial changes. We will no longer exhaust ourselves trying to convince skeptical committees that our innovations are safe and worthwhile. We will no longer compromise our effectiveness to comply with procedures designed to slow rather than facilitate progress. The ambassador's voice grew stronger, more confident. In isolation, humanity will be free to be fully human. We will follow our instincts to help those in need, to share what we have learned, to push boundaries and explore possibilities. Perhaps someday, when the galaxy is ready for what we offer, we will be invited to rejoin the broader community. Until then, we will tend our own garden and hope it grows into something beautiful. The chamber fell into a profound silence. The delegates absorbed the full implications of Ambassador Chen's words. Finally, Whisper of Distant Stars generated a complex harmonic that the translation matrix rendered as deep sadness. Ambassador, is there truly nothing that could change humanity's decision? No accommodation, no compromise, no gesture of goodwill that might convince your people to reconsider. Chen was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant as if consulting with voices only she could hear. When she spoke again, her words carried the weight of finality. Whisper of Distant Stars, if this council were to immediately approve every medical technology we have offered, every agricultural innovation, every clean energy solution, if you were to implement them across the galaxy tomorrow and save the billions of lives that could be saved, that would be wonderful. But it would not change our decision. The ambassador's voice grew softer, more personal. The tragedy is not that these technologies have been delayed or rejected. The tragedy is that this council, composed of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, spent 73 years looking at solutions to massive suffering and chose to file them away rather than use them. The tragedy is that when presented with opportunities to reduce hunger, cure diseases, and improve life for countless beings, the response was always to study them further, to proceed cautiously, to maintain the status quo. Chen looked directly at each section of the chamber. Even if you proved everything tomorrow, you would be doing so not because you recognized the value of our contributions, but because you wanted to prevent our departure. That is not the foundation for the kind of partnership we had hoped to build. High Counselor Zephy's pulse through colors indicating desperate hope. Then what would constitute such a foundation? What would humanity require to consider remaining? The ambassador's answer came without hesitation, as if she had considered this question many times. Nothing that you can provide, High Counselor. The foundation we sought was recognition that human perspectives might have value even when they challenged established norms. It was respect for our judgment even when our solutions seemed radical. It was trust that our motivations were genuine even when our methods were unfamiliar. She paused, then continued with quiet dignity. These things cannot be granted as concessions or negotiated as terms. They must arise naturally from genuine appreciation of what we offer. Since such appreciation has not developed over 73 years of demonstrated good faith, we no longer believe it will develop at all. Counselor Vrex's scales shifted into patterns indicating something approaching respect. So humanity departs not in anger, but in disappointment. In acceptance. Chen corrected gently. We are disappointed? Yes, but disappointment implies that we still hoped for different outcomes. We have moved beyond hope to acceptance. We accept that this council values stability over progress, tradition over innovation, comfortable procedures over effective results. These are not necessarily wrong values, but they are incompatible with human nature. The ambassador's final words to the council carried no bitterness, only a profound sadness. We leave with gratitude for what we learned and regret for what might have been. We harbor no ill will toward any member of this council. We simply recognize that our paths have diverged, and it is time to walk our separate ways. The holographic image of Ambassador Chen began to flicker more noticeably as the transmission prepared to terminate. But before she could end the connection, an unprecedented event occurred in the Great Hall. High Counselor Zephy's rose from the crystal throne, something that had not happened during a formal session over a century. The ancient ethereals, crystalline form pulsed with colors that the translation matrix struggled to interpret, a complex mixture of regret, respect, and something approaching sorrow. Ambassador Chen, before you sever this connection, I wish to say something that I should have said decades ago. The chamber fell absolutely silent. Every delegate, regardless of species, understood the historical significance of the moment. I have served on this council for 800 years. Zephy's continued, harmonics creating a melody of profound sadness. I have witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, the negotiation of countless treaties, the resolution of innumerable disputes. I have seen species join our ranks and contribute to the great work of galactic civilization, but I have never seen a species offer so much while asking for so little in return. The High Counselor's form shifted through patterns of deep blue and silver colors associated with mourning in ethereal culture. We told ourselves that caution was wisdom. We convinced ourselves that maintaining stability was more important than embracing change. We rationalized our resistance to human innovations as prudent governance rather than admitting it for what it truly was, fear. Other delegates began to shift uncomfortably as Zephy's continued. We feared that accepting human solutions would make us appear inadequate. We feared that human efficiency would highlight our own inefficiencies. We feared that human compassion would shame us for our lack of it. So, we created procedural barriers, raised bureaucratic obstacles, and found excuses to delay or deny rather than confront our own shortcomings. Chen's image had stabilized, and she waited with the patience that had characterized humanity's entire relationship with the Council. You speak of your departure as an acceptance of incompatibility, Zephy said, his harmonics now heavy with regret. But I fear it is something far worse. It is an indictment of our failure to grow, to change, to become better than we were. In rejecting your gifts, we rejected the opportunity to improve not just galactic civilization, but ourselves. The High Counselor's form began to dim, as if the emotional weight of his words was draining his energy. You leave us not because you failed to belong, but because we failed to recognize that belonging is not about conformity, it's about mutual respect, shared purpose, and the willingness to learn from one another. Whisper of distant stars generated subsonic frequencies of agreement, soon joined by harmonics from other delegates. For the first time in 73 years, the council seemed to speak with one voice, a voice filled with regret for opportunities lost and bridges burned. Chen's response was gentle, almost maternal. High Counselor Zephy's, your words honor us more than any formal recognition could have. They suggest that our time here was not entirely wasted, that perhaps some understanding has finally been achieved, even if it comes too late to change our decision. The ambassador's final words to the council carried a note of hope despite their finality. We leave you with a gift that cannot be rejected because it requires no formal approval, the knowledge that change is possible, that growth can occur, that even ancient institutions can learn new ways of being. Perhaps our departure will create the space for new voices to be heard, new perspectives to be valued, new solutions to be embraced. The transmission began to fade as Chen concluded, "We go in peace, with respect for what you are and hope for what you might become. May the galaxy find the wisdom to grow beyond our collective limitations." The holographic image dissolved, leaving the great hall in profound silence. For the first time in council history, no one moved to call for the next item of business. The delegates sat in contemplation, each grappling with the weight of what had been lost and the magnitude of what might have been. In that silence, the true cost of 73 years of missed opportunities began to settle upon them like a shroud. The humans were gone, and the galaxy was smaller for their absence. 3 months after humanity's withdrawal from the Galactic Council, the Great Hall looked exactly the same as it had for centuries, with one notable exception: the human delegations section remained precisely as it had been left, down to the small potted earth plant that Ambassador Chen had kept on her desk. No one had been willing to remove it, and no one could explain why. High Counselor Zephy's called the session to order, but his usual commanding presence seemed diminished. The business of the day proceeded as it always had: trade disputes, territorial negotiations, bureaucratic procedural updates. But something fundamental had changed in the rhythm of council sessions. It wasn't until Counselor Vrex raised a question about the recent plague outbreak on Kepler 44 to be that the absence truly hit home. The traditional medical response protocols have proven inadequate, he reported, his scales rippling with frustration. We have lost 12% of the colony population, and the infection continues to spread despite our best efforts. The chamber fell silent. Every delegate present knew that in the archives, gathering digital dust, lay human medical innovations that could have ended the plague within days. Technologies that had been deemed too radical for approval now represented solutions that were desperately needed but no longer available. Whisper of distant stars generated mournful subsonic frequencies. Perhaps we could contact the Terran Federation directly. Request emergency humanitarian assistance. We could try, Zephy's replied, his crystalline form pulsing with dim hope. But consider how such a request would appear to them. For 7 decades, we rejected their medical innovations as unsafe and untested. Now, when we face a crisis we cannot solve with traditional methods, we ask them to provide exactly what we previously spurned. The High Counselor's harmonics grew sadder. Would we not simply be confirming their assessment of our character, that we value their contributions only when we need them desperately, not when they could prevent such desperation in the first place? The silence that followed was answer enough. Similar scenes played out repeatedly in the months that followed. Agricultural crises that human farming innovations could have prevented. Energy shortages that human clean fusion technology could have eliminated. Communication breakdowns that human quantum networking could have resolved instantly. Each crisis reminded the Council of what they had lost. More painfully, each crisis reminded them of what they had chosen to lose, not through accident or misfortune, but through their own systematic rejection of offered solutions. The irony was profound and inescapable. The galaxy's most advanced governing body, composed of species with millennia of experience in civilization building, had spent 73 years rejecting the very innovations that could have solved their most persistent problems. They had chosen familiar failure over unfamiliar success, comfortable problems over uncomfortable solutions. In the empty space where the human delegation had once sat, a small Earth plant continued to grow, tended by automated systems that no one had thought to deactivate. It served as a living reminder of what had been offered freely and rejected thoughtlessly, of potential unrealized and opportunities squandered. The humans were gone, and in their absence, the true magnitude of their contributions finally became clear. But recognition that comes too late is perhaps the cruelest form of understanding, for it illuminates not just what was lost, but what never had to be lost at all. In the silence of the great hall, broken only by the whisper of recycled air and the gentle hum of anagraph systems, the galaxy's leaders began to understand the true meaning of regret. They had been offered partnership with a species whose greatest desire was to help, to heal, to improve the conditions they encountered, and they had said no. 6 months after humanity's departure, the first real shock came from an unexpected source. The hegemony's outer rim colonies began experiencing massive supply shortages. For decades, human freight companies had quietly handled the most difficult logistics routes, the ones that other species found unprofitable or too dangerous. These routes connected isolated mining colonies, agricultural outposts, and research stations to the main trade networks. When humanity withdrew, they had meticulously transferred all contracts and routes to other carriers, providing detailed documentation and transition support. But what they couldn't transfer was their willingness to take on the routes that barely broke even, the emergency supply runs to disaster-stricken worlds, the humanitarian cargo that other species treated as low-priority freight. Councillor Kethfer found himself addressing the council with a problem he had never anticipated. The Rigel Mining Consortium reports that replacement carriers are demanding triple the shipping rates for supply runs to their asteroid facilities. The human company that previously handled these routes charged cost plus a minimal profit margin. They claimed it was good practice for their pilots and the right thing to do. He paused, his serpentine form coiling with frustration. Similar reports are coming in from across hegemony space. Research stations that received weekly supply deliveries now wait months between shipments. Medical supply runs that humans completed within hours of request now require weeks of bureaucratic processing to justify the expense. High Councillor Zephy's pulsed with increasingly agitated colors. Surely the free market will adjust. Other carriers will expand their operations to fill the gap. That's just it, Kethfer replied. The market is adjusting by abandoning unprofitable routes entirely. What we failed to realize is that humans weren't just providing shipping services. They were subsidizing essential infrastructure that no other species was willing to maintain. At those prices, whisper of distant stars generated complex harmonics indicating deep concern. Are you suggesting that human shipping companies were operating at a loss? Not at a loss, but at margins so small that they might as well have been. Our economic analysts estimate that human carriers were earning perhaps to 2–3% profit on routes that other species require 15 to 20% to justify. The humans told us they believed in long-term relationship building and supporting galactic infrastructure. We assumed it was marketing rhetoric. The implications began to sink in across the chamber. The humans hadn't just been participating in the galactic economy, they had been quietly subsidizing portions of it, keeping essential but unprofitable services running through their willingness to accept minimal returns. How many other sectors might be affected? Zephy's asked, though his pulsing pattern suggested he already feared the answer. Kethfer consulted his datapad, his scales shifting 2 colors indicating deep unease. Preliminary analysis suggests significant disruption in emergency services, humanitarian aid distribution, research collaboration networks, and what humans called community infrastructure projects. These were all areas where human organizations provided services at cost or near cost, viewing them as investments in galactic well-being rather than profit centers. The chamber fell silent as delegates began to realize the true scope of humanity's quiet integration into galactic civilization. They hadn't just been members who followed the rules and paid their dues, they had been the invisible foundation supporting countless systems that everyone else took for granted. 9 months after humanity's departure, the Crystalline World's Cultural Festival, a 1,000-year tradition celebrating artistic achievement across the galaxy, faced an unprecedented crisis. For the first time in living memory, attendance was down by 30%, and participant feedback included repeatedly used phrases like lacking vibrancy, emotionally flat, and strangely hollow. Director Zeltar, an ancient ethereal whose crystalline form had witnessed centuries of festivals, found himself consulting records he had never thought to examine. What he discovered left him pulsing with colors indicating profound shock. Council delegates, he reported to an emergency cultural committee session, I have uncovered something remarkable in our festival archives. For the past 73 years, human artists have accounted for only 2% of official participants, yet they have influenced the work of approximately 47% of all other participants. He activated a holographic display showing interconnected webs of artistic influence. Human music provided inspiration for hegemony sound sculptures. Human literature sparked new forms of Vorthic narrative poetry. Human visual arts introduced color theory techniques that became standard across 17 different species artistic traditions. Director Zelthar's form shifted through patterns indicating growing dismay, but their influence went beyond inspiration. Human artists routinely collaborated with others, offering technical assistance, sharing resources, and providing what they called creative support to artists from species who struggled with certain artistic forms. The display shifted to show specific examples. The legendary Nebular Symphony Winds of Tomorrow that we celebrated as the greatest musical achievement of the past century. It was composed using harmonic theory that human musicians taught to whisper of distant stars during late-night creative exchange sessions. The Vorthic poetry cycle scales of truth that revolutionized narrative structure. It employed storytelling techniques that human writers shared freely in literary workshops they organized and funded themselves. Councillor Vrex, who had been invited to observe the cultural committee session, shifted his scales into patterns indicating confusion. But surely these works retain their artistic merit regardless of their collaborative origins. They do. Zeltar agreed, but the creative environment that produced them no longer exists. Human artists didn't just create their own works, they fostered creativity in others. They organized cross-species artistic collaborations, funded experimental projects that commercial sponsors considered too risky, and provided what they called creative mentorship to young artists from dozens of species. The director's harmonics grew mournful. We are discovering that removing humans from our cultural ecosystem has effects far beyond the loss of their own artistic contributions. The entire creative environment has become less collaborative, less experimental, less vital. He paused, consulting more records. Human arts education programs alone had provided training to over 200,000 non-human artists over the past 7 decades. Their Open Studio initiative offered free workspace and equipment to any artist who needed it, regardless of species or economic status. Their Cultural Bridge program facilitated artistic exchanges between species who had never collaborated before. Whisper of Distant Stars, who had been silent throughout the presentation, finally generated subsonic frequencies of deep regret. They gave us more than art. They gave us the framework within which art could flourish. The realization was devastating in its simplicity. The humans hadn't just been contributing to galactic culture, they had been nurturing it, supporting it, and creating the conditions within which other species could achieve their own artistic potential. Their departure hadn't just removed human creativity from the galaxy, it had removed the scaffolding that supported creativity itself. 1 year after humanity's departure, Crystal, the Vorthic head of the Galactic Research Coordination Council, made a discovery that would haunt her for the rest of her considerably long reptilian life. While conducting a routine analysis of research productivity trends, she uncovered patterns that defied all her expectations about scientific collaboration. The data is unambiguous, she reported to a hastily convened council session. Research output across all disciplines has declined by 38% since humanity's departure. Publication quality, as measured by citation impact and practical application, has decreased by 47%. Most troubling of all, breakthrough discoveries, genuine paradigm shifts that open new fields of inquiry have dropped by 62%. The chamber buzzed with confused harmonics, clicks, and subsonic frequencies as delegates struggled to process the implications. How is this possible? Demanded Counselor Vrex. Humans represented less than 8% of active researchers. In the galactic scientific community, Dr. Crystal S. scales shifted into patterns indicating profound dismay. That's what we thought. But deeper analysis reveals that humans were disproportionately involved in interdisciplinary research, cross-species collaboration projects, and what they called high-risk, high-reward experimental programs. She activated a holographic display, showing research network maps. Look at these collaboration patterns. Human researchers didn't just work within their own teams, they served as connective nodes between research groups from different species who would never have collaborated otherwise. They translated concepts between incompatible scientific paradigms, facilitated communication between researchers who thought in fundamentally different ways, and identified potential synergies that no single species team would have recognized. The network maps showed complex webs of connection, with human researchers serving as bridges between otherwise isolated clusters of scientific activity. Remove the human nodes, and the networks fragmented into disconnected islands, but surely, other species can perform these connective functions, suggested High Counselor Zephes. In theory? Yes, Dr. Crystal replied. But humans possessed a unique combination of scientific curiosity, cultural adaptability, and what they called interdisciplinary thinking that made them natural facilitators of cross-species research. They could work with the highly logical methodologies preferred by ethereals while also appreciating the intuitive approaches favored by nebulans. They could bridge the gap between Vorthic systematic analysis and hegemony experimental boldness. The scientist's voice grew more distressed as she continued. More importantly, they were willing to do this facilitative work without claiming primary credit for the results. Human researchers routinely served as secondary authors on papers where their contributions were essential to the breakthrough, but they allowed researchers from other species to receive primary recognition. She paused to access additional data. We've identified 14,847 major scientific advances from the past 7 decades where human researchers played crucial facilitative roles but received minimal formal credit. They called it collaborative research support and considered it a normal part of scientific cooperation. Whisper of distant stars generated harmonics indicating growing horror. Are you saying that human researchers were essentially ghostwriting significant portions of galactic scientific progress? Not ghostwriting, Dr. Crystal clarified. They were providing the collaborative framework within which breakthrough discoveries became possible. They identified promising research directions that single-species teams had overlooked. They suggested experimental approaches that combine methodologies from different scientific traditions. They facilitated communication between researchers who spoke different languages, both literally and figuratively. The implications were staggering. The galaxy's scientific progress hadn't just been enhanced by human participation, it had been fundamentally dependent on human facilitation of cooperation between species who would otherwise have remained scientifically isolated. Without humans serving as bridges between our different research traditions, Dr. Crystal concluded, we appear to be reverting to the slower, more limited scientific progress that characterized the pre-human era. We're not just missing human discoveries, we're missing the discoveries that only became possible through human-facilitated collaboration. 15 months after humanity's departure, Ambassador Thekmer of the Peripheral Worlds Alliance arrived at the Galactic Council in a state of unprecedented agitation. His crystalline form, normally a stable blue-green indicating diplomatic composure, flickered rapidly through colors indicating extreme distress. Honored council members, he began, his harmonics betraying barely controlled panic. The peripheral worlds face a crisis that threatens the stability of an entire galactic sector. 3 separate territorial disputes have escalated to the brink of armed conflict. Trade negotiations between the Centauri Federation and the outer colonies have completely broken down, and the refugee situation from the Kepler Nebula expansion has devolved into a humanitarian catastrophe. High Counselor Zephy's pulsed with colors indicating concern. These are serious matters, Ambassador Thekmer, but surely they fall within the scope of standard diplomatic protocols. The Council has extensive experience in mediating such disputes. That's just it, Thekmer replied, his form now cycling through rapid patterns of distress. We've tried standard protocols. We've followed established procedures. We've consulted precedents from similar historical situations. Nothing is working. The parties involved refuse to engage meaningfully with council-appointed mediators. Trade negotiations collapse within hours of beginning, and refugee coordination efforts have devolved into bureaucratic chaos. Counselor Kethver uncoiled slightly. What makes these particular situations so intractable? Ambassador Thekmer's response was devastating in its simplicity. Because for the past 73 years, situations like these weren't handled through standard diplomatic protocols. They were resolved through what humans called informal mediation and humanitarian diplomacy. We never realized it was happening because it occurred outside official council frameworks. The chamber fell silent as the implications began to sink in. Human diplomatic personnel, Thekmer continued, maintained extensive informal networks throughout the galaxy. When tensions arose between species or governments, human mediators would arrive unofficially, sometimes as trade representatives or cultural exchange coordinators. They would facilitate conversations between parties who refused to speak to each other officially, identify common ground that professional diplomats had missed, and propose creative solutions that fell outside traditional diplomatic frameworks. He activated a holographic display showing conflict resolution statistics. Over the past 7 decades, the peripheral worlds alone experienced 347 potentially serious disputes. Of these, 312 were resolved before they required formal council intervention. We attributed this to good fortune and the natural maturation of galactic diplomacy. We now realize that virtually all of these resolutions involved human informal mediation. Whisper of distant stars generated subsonic frequencies of amazement. Are you saying that humans were conducting an entire parallel diplomatic system? Not parallel, Thekmer corrected. Supplementary. They weren't competing with official council diplomacy. They were quietly handling the problems that would have overwhelmed official channels. They resolved minor disputes before they became major crises, facilitated trade agreements that parties were too proud to negotiate officially, and coordinated humanitarian responses that were too urgent to wait for bureaucratic approval. The ambassador's form had stabilized into colors indicating profound regret. Human diplomats never claimed credit for these successes. They never sought official recognition or formal authority. They simply saw problems that needed solving and took it upon themselves to solve them. They called it preventive diplomacy and considered it a normal part of galactic citizenship. Counselor Vrex's scales rippled with patterns indicating dawning understanding. And now that they're gone, now we're seeing the true baseline level of galactic diplomatic stability, Thekmer finished. Without human informal mediation smoothing over tensions and resolving disputes before they escalate, we're experiencing the full burden of conflict that the galaxy naturally generates. The Council's formal diplomatic apparatus was never designed to handle this volume of problems because it never had to. High Counselor Zephy's pulse through increasingly agitated colors. How many other regions are experiencing similar difficulties? All of them. Vecmer replied simply, the humans weren't just mediating disputes in the periphery. They were quietly preventing conflicts throughout the galaxy. Their departure has revealed that our much-celebrated era of galactic peace and stability was largely dependent on human diplomatic intervention that we never acknowledged because we never realized it was happening. The silence that followed was profound and terrible. The Council had spent decades congratulating itself on the unprecedented stability of galactic civilization, never recognizing that this stability was being maintained by the species they had systematically excluded from meaningful participation in official diplomatic processes. 2 years after humanity's departure, emergency sessions of the Galactic Council had become so frequent that they were no longer considered emergencies, they were simply the new normal. High Counselor Zephy's, his crystalline form now permanently dim with exhaustion, called the latest crisis meeting to order with harmonics that carried little of his former authority. The reports from all sectors paint a consistent picture. He began, his voice heavy with accumulated grief. What we initially attributed to temporary disruption following humanity's departure has revealed itself to be systemic collapse of interdependent networks that we never realized existed. The assembled delegates, once proud representatives of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, now resembled refugees from their own success. Trade networks that had functioned smoothly for decades were fragmenting. Scientific collaborations that had produced breakthrough discoveries were dissolving. Cultural exchanges that had enriched billions of lives were being abandoned. Diplomatic relationships that had maintained peace for generations were unraveling. Dr. Crichton, now serving as the Council's chief systems analyst, presented her latest findings with scales that had lost their vibrant patterns entirely. We have identified what we are calling the Human Support Network, and vast, interconnected web of services, relationships, and initiatives that humanity maintained across every aspect of galactic civilization. Her holographic display showed a three-dimensional map of galactic space with countless fine threads connecting worlds, systems, and regions. These connections represent human-maintained shipping routes, research collaborations, cultural exchanges, diplomatic relationships, humanitarian aid networks, educational programs, and what humans called community support initiatives. Each thread represents a connection that other species took for granted but never thought to maintain themselves. The map was breathtaking in its complexity, a gossamer web of human initiative that had quietly bound the galaxy together. Now observe what happens when we remove human participation, Dr. Crichton continued. The threads began disappearing from the display, and the effect was catastrophic. What had been an integrated galactic civilization fragmented into isolated clusters of activity, with vast gaps where connection and cooperation had once existed. Counselor Kethfer's voice was barely a whisper. How many beings are we talking about? How many lives were touched by these human networks? Conservative estimates suggest that human support networks directly impacted the lives of 1.7 trillion beings across the galaxy, Dr. Crichton replied. But indirect effects the communities that existed because of human-maintained infrastructure, the discoveries made possible by human-facilitated collaboration, the conflicts prevented by human mediation. These indirect effects may have touched every sentient being in known space. Ambassador Vecmer, now serving as the Council's Crisis Coordination Director, added his own grim assessment. We're not just dealing with the loss of human contributions. We're dealing with the collapse of collaborative frameworks that humans created and maintained. Other species had learned to depend on human-facilitated cooperation without realizing their dependence. His crystalline form flickered with patterns indicating despair. The refugee crisis in the Outer Rim has become a catastrophe because the human-coordinated response networks no longer exist. The trade dispute between the core worlds and the periphery has escalated because human informal mediators are no longer available to find creative solutions. The plague outbreak in the hegemony systems continues to spread because the human-maintained medical supply networks have been abandoned. Whisper of distant stars generated deep subsonic frequencies that seemed to make the entire chamber tremble. We are witnessing the collapse of galactic civilization itself, are we not? High Counselor Zephys was quiet for a long moment before responding. Not collapse, he said finally. Regression. We are reverting to the state of galactic civilization that existed before humanity joined the Council, a collection of isolated species pursuing their individual interests with minimal cooperation and limited progress. He paused, his form pulsing with colors indicating profound sadness. The tragedy is that we thought this was normal. We thought the unprecedented cooperation, rapid progress, and relative peace of the past 73 years represented the natural evolution of galactic civilization. We never realized that it was all built on the foundation of human initiative, human facilitation, and human willingness to work for the common good rather than individual advantage. The council chamber fell into a silence so complete that the background hum of life support systems seemed thunderous by comparison. In that silence, the assembled representatives of a dozen species came to terms with a truth too devastating to deny. They had rejected not just humanity's membership, but the very spirit of cooperation and mutual aid that had made their golden age possible. The humans were gone, and with them had gone any hope of maintaining the interconnected, collaborative civilization that everyone had taken for granted. What remained was the harsh reality of species pursuing their separate paths, no longer bound together by the invisible threads of human compassion and initiative. In their systematic rejection of human nature, the Council had destroyed the very thing that had made their golden age possible. And now, in the growing darkness of their regression to isolation and competition, they finally understood what they had lost. 5 years after humanity's departure, Counselor Zephys stood alone in the Great Hall, his crystalline form barely glowing in the reduced lighting that the Council could no longer afford to maintain at full power. The chamber that had once hosted representatives from across the galaxy now echoed with emptiness. Half the seats remained unfilled as species after species had withdrawn from active participation, returning to their homeworlds to manage their own declining affairs. The small earth plant still sat on what had been Ambassador Chen's desk, now grown into a small tree whose roots had somehow found their way through the metal flooring to the hydroponic systems below. No one had the heart to remove it, and in the past year, it had become something of a shrine, a place where delegates would come to sit in contemplation of what had been lost. Zephys approached the tree slowly, his movements betraying the weight of accumulated years and regrets. The plant had grown beyond its original container, its roots creating a small garden in the center of the Great Hall. Other species had begun bringing seeds, cuttings, and specimens from their own worlds, creating an informal memorial that had become more sacred than any official monument. You were right, of course, he said aloud, though there was no one to hear him except the silent plants. All of you were right. We spent so much time fearing change that we forgot how to embrace growth. A small holographic recorder in his crystalline form activated, documenting his words as part of what he had come to think of as his final testimony, a record of failure that future generations might study to avoid repeating the same mistakes. The official histories will record that the Galactic Council experienced a period of reorganization and restructuring following humanity's voluntary withdrawal. He continued, his harmonics carrying deep melancholy. They will speak of economic adjustments and diplomatic realignments and cultural evolution. They will not speak of collapse, though that is what we have witnessed. Zephys extended one crystalline appendage to touch a leaf of the earth plant, marveling at its resilience and continued growth despite the declining conditions around it. But we know the truth. We know that for 73 years, humanity quietly held our civilization together with countless acts of service, cooperation, and selfless dedication. They were the invisible foundation upon which our golden age was built, and we were too proud, too fearful, and too set in our ways to recognize their value until it was gone. He paused, accessing files that had become his constant companions, records of human contributions that the Council had systematically ignored or minimized. The list seemed to grow longer every day as more consequences of humanity's absence became apparent. The final irony is that they left us exactly as they had lived among us, quietly, without drama, without seeking to cause pain or disruption. Even in departure, they demonstrated the grace and consideration that we had failed to appreciate in their presence. They completed their obligations, transferred their responsibilities, and withdrew with dignity intact. Zephyr's form shifted, through colors indicating deep regret. We told ourselves that we were maintaining stability, preserving order, protecting galactic civilization from the chaos of uncontrolled change. In reality, we were preventing the very evolution that could have lifted us to heights we never imagined possible. The Great Hall's environmental systems hummed more quietly now, running on reduced power as the Council's resources dwindled along with its membership and influence. But the garden around the human tree seemed to thrive, as if it drew sustenance from sources beyond the failing technological infrastructure. In the archives of the Terran Federation, assuming anyone still maintains communication with them, this recording will serve as the Galactic Council's official apology and acknowledgement of our catastrophic failure of judgment. We offer it not in hope of forgiveness, we have no right to expect such grace, but as a warning to future civilizations who might face similar choices. Zephyr's voice grew stronger, more resolute, as he approached the conclusion of his testimony. Let it be recorded that humanity offered us partnership, and we chose hierarchy. They offered innovation, and we chose tradition. They offered their hearts, and we chose our fears. They offered to build a better galaxy together, and we chose to preserve our illusion of superiority. He was quiet for a long moment, watching as a small maintenance robot tended the garden with programming that some anonymous human technician had installed years ago, another quiet gift that continued giving long after its creators had departed. The humans have gone home to their own worlds, where they undoubtedly continue to build, to grow, to help one another, and to reach for possibilities that we cannot even imagine. We remain here in the ruins of what might have been, finally understanding too late the value of what we rejected. Zephyr's began to dim as his energy reserves depleted, but he continued speaking into the recorder. Perhaps someday, when we have learned humility and genuine respect for others who think differently than we do, we might send ambassadors to the human worlds, not to ask them to return, that would be presumptuous beyond measure, but that simply to learn from them how to be better than we were, how to see opportunity where we saw threat, how to embrace change where we embraced stagnation, how to value compassion where we valued control. His form was barely glowing now, but his words carried the clarity of hard-won wisdom. Until that day, we tend this garden they left behind and remember that civilization's greatest achievements come not from the accumulation of power and the preservation of traditions, but from the simple willingness to help one another reach for something better than what we are. The recording ended as Zephyr's finally powered down for his rest cycle, leaving only the soft sounds of the garden's growth in the darkness. Above, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, and somewhere among them, humanity continued their quiet work of building better worlds, not for the galaxy that had rejected them, but for the future they would create from the seeds of their own unshakable compassion. In the Great Hall of the Galactic Council, a small earth tree continued to grow, its roots spreading deep and its branches reaching toward light that flickered but never quite died. It grew not in defiance of the darkness around it, but in faithful demonstration of what patience, persistence, and quiet grace could accomplish. Even in the most unlikely places, the humans had left, but their garden remembered, and in remembering, it continued to teach lessons to anyone wise enough to listen.